The power of storytelling is a life force that can change the world. Dani Hedlund, founder and CEO of the Brink Literacy Project, learned that through a school of hard knocks, and you will be captivated to hear how she's built an incredible organization using the power of storytelling to open new horizons for marginalized people all over the world. On this episode of Making Our World Better.
Welcome to the Making Our World Better podcast, where you will find motivation and encouragement through lively conversations with inspirational people who every day are making our world a better place. Now, here's your host, Jay Clark.
Welcome to the podcast. I am Jay Clark, and I'm thrilled to welcome Dani Hedlund, Chief Executive and founder of the Brink Literacy Project, an organization devoted to utilizing the power of storytelling to positively affect the lives of people on the brink. Through its education, community, and publishing divisions, Brink's Literacy Project works worldwide to foster a love of literature, increase literacy rates, and use storytelling to empower underserved communities. Awesome. As CEO, Dani creates the vision for the organization, manages fundraising and advocacy, spearheads new initiatives, and also teaches. She is also the editor-in-chief of Brink's critically acclaimed publication, Friction, one of the world's fastest growing literacy magazine, and the lead creator of products like the popular Literacy Tarot campaign. Dani speaks at events all over the world on the importance of literacy and education reform, supporting emerging creatives, and getting people excited about the next generation of literature. I can't wait to get into all of this. Dani, thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Jay.
So let's start simple and just tell me how you would describe the Brink's Literacy Project to somebody that's never heard anything about it.
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So when I kind of think of the mission behind Brink, it's because I'm a founder completely tied to my own origin story. So for those of you who are familiar with Colorado, I grew up in a tiny little rural farm town called Elbert. And there's a lot of wonderful things about growing up that rural and idyllic, but it was also a very low opportunity sort of town. Not a lot of people got out. Not a lot of people went on to uni. There was a good amount of meth addiction and friends and family that kind of end up on the wrong side of the law. So in that way, it definitely created a bubble where there was certain stories told about you. And for me in particular, because I was hilariously dyslexic and then in special ed as like the one special ed kid in this tiny small town, the stories I heard were things like, you're stupid and you don't matter. And there's no point in putting in effort because you're never going to get out. Like you're never going to go to university. You're never going to make something of yourself. And that kind of became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I saw that taking down so many members of my community. And I was really, really lucky. It's so cliche, but I had like two teachers. They were married, the Brownleys, a math and an English teacher, and they kind of just took a shine to me. And they pulled me aside and in not these words, essentially said, "You seem not to be dumb. Would you like some books?" And those books really changed my life. Not only did they give me the hard skills I needed to get out of that town, to get a scholarship, and to move on my future pathways, more than anything, they kind of changed the story that I told about myself. I really particularly imprinted on Lord of the Rings. And I was just like, things are rough here. But I'm not Frodo. Like I don't need to crawl up this incredibly tall mountain and throw the one ring in. I just need to study hard, not get addicted to meth and graduate. So for me, that really changed everything. And so by the time I kind of got out of that town, I wasn't so taken with the accomplishment. I was really taken with how close I got to never having that opportunity. And so as a very naive 19-year-old, I thought, well, there are so many people from situations way worse than mine. And if all you really need to create these really big future pathways is some really good storytelling and a couple authority figures that say, hey, I see potential in you. I was like, I don't know anything about business, but that seems like a business. Maybe I can do this. And so I started the company really young. And there's a lot of wonder about starting something young. You're too naive to know that it's going to punch you in the face for the next 2 decades. And so you just go through. But yeah, that's essentially the origin of the entire organization, is the idea that stories have an incredible power to change. They change the way we think about ourselves. So that's all the behavioral and mental health work, but they also help us build resiliency and a clear vision of our future. And they also give you all the cool hard skills, critical thinking, literacy, education pathways, so you can step towards those doors. And that's everything we do. We do it in underserved populations across Colorado, and then we elevate that globally.
Well, I love it because you talk about the power of storytelling, and it kind of can go both ways, right? Because you're hearing the stories when you're little, you can't. Mm-hmm. And then you start hearing the stories you can. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit about maybe some of your specific programs and that really use that power in a positive way to help some of these folks that were in situations like yours.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We run a whole bunch of different kinds of programming in different populations, but I just taught a class a couple months ago, so it's really high on my mind to kind of illustrate the entire work we're doing. So we just taught this really great course for adults re-entering from prison. And the reason that we work a lot in the prison pipeline is if you kind of think of society as a ladder, all the rungs should catch you, your parents, your family, your teachers, social services. And if you're dropped by every single one of those rungs, you usually end up just as touched. So we have a really big focus on the entire school to prison pipeline. And I really enjoy teaching adults because I think I've been teaching long enough that I don't know how to be appropriate enough to teach kids. So this is like the only place my board will be like, okay, Dani can go teach a bunch of men re-entering from the drug trade. And the really great thing about these courses is we know that there's a lot of essential help that we need. And a lot of that is mental and behavioral health, but it's also hard skills like literacy. And those are things that particularly if you're a man in prison, you are never going to raise your hand and say, you know what, I've really been struggling with my mental health lately, or I do struggle to read. So what we do is we want to destigmatize that. So what we come in with is, hey, we're teaching a comic book program. Come in and discover your superpowers. And essentially we're just being really sneaky. So you come in and you read a lot of great comics with us. It's everything from Batman to our own custom short comics and memoirs. And through the act of talking about how stories work, particularly this idea of turning point, what is one moment in your life if you made one decision, but if you had chosen differently, how radically altered would your life be? And we talk about it in simple things like, the Joker's origin story is he's just a failing comedian trying to take care of his wife. And of course, then he becomes a huge villain, something that we all identify with in this population. But also, how does that apply to your own life? And so we slowly kind of drip these very big therapeutic group therapy practices throughout the course, but we use it under the safe guise of storytelling. So each of the students actually write a short memoir that's in comic book form. Comics, because it's a great way to court low literacy and reluctant readers, but also it's just a fun, incredible way to see yourself on the page, and that really validates our stories. So right, Jay, I'm rambling, but the point is you have this incredible group of men come in. In the last class we taught, our youngest person in the class was 19, getting let out on day release from jail. And then we had someone well into their 70s. So a really weird group. And then we start really talking about what are the moments that made us into who we are. And the discussions are incredible. It was in some ways horrifying to learn that pretty much all of them had the exact same memory of being about 8 when someone who was vaguely called uncle taught them how to mix meth in a bathtub. Odd turning point. So us discussing what is it like to have rites of passage in a community where the day you're released from prison is treated with more fanfare than the day that a man graduates from high school or gets married or has their first kid. So we have these deep, amazing conversations as they're all writing about their own stories. And in that, you're seeing them open up to each other for the first time. The most common thing we hear in class is, I've never told this to anyone before.
Wow.
And they're sharing it with their peers and they're supporting each other. So it's this group of quiet and or boisterously egotistical men breaking down and lifting each other up. And then on the back end, it's a community that's there to nurture each other and understand they should take accountability for their actions, but also forgive themselves, forgive their community, create a good pathway forward. And we're doing all of it through comics, which is fun and weird and silly.
But I love it because I think it's a great way. I've seen this in a lot of really great nonprofits like yours, is that they find a way to meet the people they're serving where they are. And that's exactly what you're doing there. And, talk about a tough, overlooked population. I mean, you're giving them that venue again through the power of story, which is awesome. And when you talk about community, I'd also love for you to talk a little bit about how you're also creating community through different platforms where people can share their voices and hear new voices.
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. You've clearly done your research, Jay. I'm very impressed. So a big part of our model, just like you said, is about meeting our students where they're at. And that means if they're going to engage in stories that are going to change the way they think about themselves, you have to be able to see yourself in those stories. Like, we can't be another literacy nonprofit that goes into a dense urban high school and throws down another dead straight white guy's stories. Don't get me wrong, I love Dickens, but it's not going to be changing hearts and minds, particularly of people that are reticent to trust in the system, because the erosion of faith in institutions is a huge problem, particularly when we talk about justice touch populations. So when they open up a book, it's got to be weird, it's got to be new, and they got to be able to see themselves. So one of the weird things we do with Friction, which is our literary magazine, it's also our primary teaching curriculum. It's actually made to be curriculum more than it's made to be read by thousands of people across the globe. So what we do is we take the very best of our students' stories and we put them in the book right next to our celebrity names. And what that does is it validates the stories that they have and the sharing that they've done. But it also says, hey, this experience is so meaningful. Smack it right next to Margaret Atwood. Put it right next to Roxane Gay. Your voice matters just as much as this. And that helps our students feel like they're valued. But it also helps the new students coming in and reading old students' work to say, hey, I really identify with that. Oh, I went through that struggle too. Oh, I guess it's not demasculine. Jay, please insert whatever.
Unmasculine, I like that.
Okay, that just sounded really odd rolling off my tongue. Unmasculine to talk about my feelings.
Right.
And so it's a really incredible tool to break down those barriers and have a huge amount of authenticity.
Well, and I would also think that it also creates a situation where if somebody's seeing this going, well, if person X is willing to come out and tell that story, that's going to help me work up the nerve to tell mine.
Yeah, absolutely. And because we're kind of weird storytellers, the publication is called Friction because we want people to feel intellectual and emotional friction. We want them to think differently about the world. It's not you turn on the TV and you listen to people with the exact same opinions as you. It's how many different opinions can we get around one topic so we can think critically. But also, we like weird stuff. Like, we have some sci-fi and some fantasy and really cool things that remind us of when we first fell in love with reading. You know, that kind of magical experience of opening up a tome that really just changed the way we thought. So, for example, the last memoir that we published from a Justice Touch student, he of course, went through this very difficult period of time with having a scarlet letter from being in prison on his resume, trying to get a job so he could stay out. And what he did, instead of just talking about how difficult racial inequity is and how difficult hiring is, he conceptualized it as this like weird, dark smoke that follows him everywhere. And he tries to bring this optimism in and this light, but the smoke gets in. And at one point, it forms this big, giant hand that pulls him down back to the streets. And being able to write that way, to have that fantastical element, not only helps us feel a good amount of like safety in writing, but also helps us take really complicated, difficult, big feelings and illustrate them in a way where the emotion can be experienced both by the reader and the writer.
One of the things that I would love to hear about is that you've been at this now, since 2007. So really, how would you say that your mission and your programming's kind of evolved over the years?
That's a great question. I make a lot of jokes about how naive starting a company at 19 is. But that meant like the first decade of us was just me doing things badly. We had a good mission.
You're learning.
Yeah, very it was definitely teachable moments for a decade.
Right.
But essentially, there was a long period of time where I just had no idea how the nonprofit sector worked. And in a lot of ways, that's created a really cool beast in what Brink became. So, for example, I didn't know anyone with money. My original board was my ex-boyfriend's mothers because they were the people who had jobs and weren't addicted to meth. And so traditional nonprofits obviously get funding from foundations and like philanthropic individuals. Mm-hmm. We didn't. We were scrappy. We decided, well, by we, me, decided that I had no idea how rich people function. So I would just make things people wanted to buy. And we would work like a for-profit company and we just donate all the money to charity. So because of that, even today, now that we have a lot of wonderful foundational support, we're still hugely supported by earned income. Like we put out weird campaigns. And friction not only is taught in the classroom, but also it's read all over the place. So that creates enough funding to run programming. So in that way, we failed in the right direction. But also there was a long time of us kind of figuring out where to find the people we wanted to serve. So the first few years, we were essentially just like a website and a community of like editors and teachers that mentored diverse people telling their stories. But Jay, that meant the only people we were helping were people that knew to type into their internet browser, how do I get my stories published? Yeah. How do I learn about how to storytell? And not only is that an incredibly small group of people, it's also not the people who are most in need. So then we started doing some boots on the ground work here in Colorado with youth and then in max security prisons, which ended up kind of being this eye-opening moment for me as a leader where I was like, hey, like this is where the biggest need is. And certainly I think storytelling can help everyone. Jay, I hope it can help you and I.
Totally.
But the people who need it the most are the people who are hungry to redefine themselves, who in a lot of ways had everything taken away from them except their story. And I realized in a nonprofit world where everything is tight and resources are strapped, we want to put our help towards who needs the most help, but also who can transform the lives of the generations after them. So we started really focusing on women, particularly justice touch women, because they have the largest impact on the incarceration and economic viability of their families. And then we were like, hey, we're doing great work in prison, but that's a small part of the problem. Like, what about preventative work? So we really started growing out our youth work. And then it was like, okay, we're doing great work in both of those, but like re-entering is still so difficult, particularly because you're looking at people who have suddenly lost the community they had inside. So we're like, okay, we'll expand our re-entry programs. And then it was like, all right, if we're doing the world's best work in our classroom, and let's say we have 100% transformation rates, all 12 people in a max security class, because that's the maximum number of students you can have safely with 2 instructors, we've changed their lives irreparably. Well, that's not the right word, Jay. We've changed their lives forever. But if they step out of prison and society doesn't want to give them a second chance, right, none of that matters. So then we started focusing really heavily on elevating those stories to build an incredible version of empathy and open doors and humanization of our population. And then we start testing it in places like Congress and Parliament. So the mission has evolved much like someone who just thinks, I bet I can take on one more thing. I bet I can take on one more thing. But we love it. And it feels like a really good holistic whole to do the entire kind of school to prison pipeline and then really focusing on building empathy and humanizing the population.
Well, there's a couple of things in there that I really love. You figured it out as a business. You know, a nonprofit is a business. You figured that out early, and it's like, well, we got to create ourselves a way to keep this sustainable, which you did. You have obviously done, and then again, being nimble enough to realize the people that you want to serve. We have to be nimble enough to come up with a program that's really going to work for that. So, I love all that stories, but you know, I know technology is always changing and artificial intelligence is here to stay. And so, you know, the methodology of what you do might shift. But don't you really believe that the power of storytelling is really going to continue to grow when it comes to communicating ideas and drawing people into learning and growing?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I think because a portion of our job is deeply in publishing, like we put out books and we put out weird literary products, I'm constantly sitting down with my publishing peers that are like, storytelling's dying, literacy is dying, like look at our book rates, doomsday. But at the end of the day, storytelling is powerful regardless of where you're getting it from.
No doubt.
Certainly from a neurological level, like the really good stuff comes from reading prose or poetry, reading words. It's what keeps your brain active. It's what keeps it healthy. But at the same time, we have to meet people where they're at. And I would like people to not watch Netflix every single moment of every day. But if they're falling in love with stories, and then that's opening them up to read comics or read prose, or at the very least, think about the world in a different way, that still really excites me. And I hope that as Brink grows, we're always going to grow with our population. So there are things like, certainly we primarily teach comics, but one of the most powerful tools that we have, particularly in prison, is like the opening section of Pixar's Up. And that's how we teach kind of what it's like to do visual storytelling.
Right.
And for anyone who has seen Up, everyone's crying and it's incredible.
Not dry and not a spoken word.
No, not a spoken word. I remember I had a student who went through 2 of our courses in Denver Women's Correctional Facility. Very, very quiet. And I was, laying it on thick as a teacher. I'm like, I'm going to single-handedly transform this woman's life. Went through the entire first course and I just couldn't get her to open up. Like, she was giving me really superficial kind of looks at her past. And then second course, we played Up. She cried hysterically, raised her hand, and then her entire story unfolded. So at the end of the day, you just need to find something that kind of cracks that door open in the heart, and you need to make people feel safe enough to share, and then make sure you honor that moment and you make sure you're there for them. Right. And I'm happy to do that in a whole bunch of different ways.
Well, and speaking of that, as the founder and chief exec, like we said in the intro, you're in charge of everything. Ultimately, the buck stops with you, but still, it sounds like you get a lot of energy from teaching. What does that do for you?
I think this is a problem with every single sector, but someone is in a job and we'll say it's something. They're coding. They love coding. And if they're really good at their job, they're going to get promoted to manager and they're never going to code again. And that's just a problem. And right. So at Brink, my chief of staff, Helen, and I are really dedicated to being like, hey, if you came here for a passion, no matter how you grow in the company, keep a bit of it. And so for me, teaching is that bit that I keep. I don't have time to do it, but I love it. And at the end of the day, it's easy to forget why you're doing something. Like, true. I love working with funders and I'm a math nerd, so I even love budgeting. But at the end of the day, if that's all I did, I would forget what we were doing. Right. And more than anything, I wouldn't be able to pivot with the community. And this is a community that needs change all the time. And if I can't sit in the classroom, if I can't have great talks with my teachers, if I can't meet our student advisors, everything we do is co-created. So every time we go into a new population, we have students in that group come and work on the curriculum with us. Everything that we do that's Justice Touch is co-facilitated with someone who is also Justice Touched. So we're really connecting to the community in that way. But man, if you want to know how storytelling changes lives, watching people who have never opened up before, open up and experience that change and then take positive steps forward to take it into their community, that'll give you enough fuel in your tank to get through any terrible budget report.
I love it. Well, you've been at this now for a while. Tell me, what are some of the lessons or advice that you would give somebody who is where you were when you started this?
I tell them not to shy away from traditional fundraising and that foundations aren't some kind of like evil overlord trying to take advantage of you. For me personally, I would offer more humility. I think there's I wonder about this all the time. Like, can great leaders really disconnect from their own ego? And I have worked on that my entire life, but there has to be enough ego to kind of look and say, hey, there's nothing here. I want something to be there. And that takes a good amount of self-belief and stubbornness. But I think in my 20s, I doubled down on the wrong things. So I would definitely advise someone starting out to say, hey, I love that you believe in something enough to try to do something impossible, but also know that you could be very wrong. I was very wrong about many, many things. And I was lucky that I was surrounded by some really good people that called me out and told me when I was wrong, and I believed them. And that was fabulous. I would also say, don't try to do things in a silo. Like I'm the kind of person that only wants to give perfect. And a lot of this is collaborative. Like when I first taught my very first course in prison, I spent months just making what I thought was the ideal curriculum. It was the best thing I'd ever written. I ferreted it away. And then I got there the very first day and I realized even with my big old bleeding heart, there was a part of me that thought of my students as statistics. Like I just saw the scary literacy rates. I saw all of these kind of terrible things I needed to watch out for. Particular DOC training is really like, here's how you're going to get shivved. Like, here is how, if you ever tell someone your first name, they're definitely going to stalk you for 50 years. And so I went in with all of these preconceptions and I got there and I remember a student just came in, looked at me and said, "Hey, Teach, how's your day? I like those shoes." And I was like, oh, they're people, obviously. But I looked down at my meticulously made curriculum and I just dramatically, because I do everything dramatically, pushed it into the waistband and just sat down on the table and I was like, "Hey guys, what kind of stories are told about prison that aren't true? What kind of things were told to you when you were growing up that really stopped the way you think about the world? Like, what are the actual barriers that are holding you back?" And I just listened. And that was the best thing that we could have done as an organization. And so just listen as a leader to what the community needs and not what you think you can give best.
Well, and another question kind of along the same lines is if you take yourself back to when you were starting the organization, could you have ever imagined you'd reach a point where you're publishing a worldwide magazine and you're traveling all over the world speaking and you're going into prison? I mean, could you ever have envisioned when you were 19 that you would be where you are now?
No, I had no idea this. I mean, I thought this was going to be like a weird side hustle where I would, I don't know, get like a responsible job, like go do GPS navigating for Google, like my degrees indicate. Right. But no, I think the biggest kind of thing that surprised me about the company is realizing that there's incredible impact you have in our students, but there's a special passion I have for watching my staff grow. And for me, those are another collection of students or service users, to use the technical term. And yeah, we mostly hire from within our communities. And that means that not only are we getting to see our students self-actualize in our workshops and the continued years of staying involved, but I have staff I've had for over a decade. We have Brinkaroos, which are babies born of Brinkers. Wow. And they have cute little onesies. And it's a family that came together. And honestly, Jay, they love each other so much. These disparately weird, amazing humans. We always call ourselves the island of misfit dolls, but they support each other and lift each other up and they live the values of the company. And they're excited to come to work. Like we give bonuses based on when you take time off instead of when you work too much, because everybody is just in it for love. And I don't know, it's a gift. It's a gift to be surrounded by that kind of community.
That is so great. And it's also, I think, a testament to your leadership to create a culture like that, because I've been around long enough to know that that doesn't always happen, where the leaders don't see their staff as their students who they want to elevate as well. So that's just, I applaud you for that. So can you tell me what really keeps you energized and excited about the future of Brink's Literacy Project?
Oh, God, that's a great question. We're kind of at a point now, we got an enormous amount of support the last couple of years to really holistically build out what we're doing. So like I said before, it was usually like, okay, we'll see a population that's in need. I have a chronic problem where I cannot say no to need. So anyone kind of comes to us and says, "Hey, I think your programs could really have an impact here." I'm always like, "Yeah, let's do it." And my darling chief of staff is like, "Girl, go."
Right.
But now we're in this really incredible point where I see the net coming together. Like I see the preventative work actively stopping people from being justice touched. I see justice touched kids not reentering the system. We see our students who are incarcerated and then through reentry really building up that community. And that is making me so excited. And now we're to a point where we kind of have the budget and the reach, not only to publish student work, but to publish student comics. Jay, very technical, silly economic thing. Comics are really, really expensive, like just so expensive and so time consuming. But in terms of a medium that can immediately jump off the page and change hearts and minds, that's been incredible. And to see what a change that has teaching. And we're also like doing a lot of really cool data stuff. I'm a real big data nerd, but we've been sending our students' comic, this memoir, out to a variety of different populations to see whether or not we're doing the changing hearts and minds thing. And so we sent a collection of it just to politicians, and to see the empathy scores that are huge. And like for people in positions of power to be like, I didn't realize that racial inequity has this much of an impact on incarceration rates. And I was like, what? But you can see that stories have that dual power, just like you were talking about. They change the person who tells the story, but they have the power to change the people that read. And now I'm getting all the magical dust of being like, hey, it's not just us in Colorado doing good work, boots on the ground, but like this is the kind of stuff that can impact further decisions and systematic change. And I can feel we're just on the cusp of that. And that's the big move in the needle stuff that everybody wants to do, but very few people can do. And I hope we can do it. Like I feel it coming together. The data's looking really good. And that just bolts me awake in the morning.
I'll bet, because you're bringing together so many different components. The data is huge, and then you've got the passion and the programs and everything. So I'll bet bringing all that together is super exciting. But as we wind down today, shift gears a little bit, and I'd love to know, what is something you will read, listen to, or watch today? What does the literacy person read?
I actually, there's a fun/worky version of that, which is I have a bunch of cool pitches to read for the Gods issue we're curating. And that is really exciting. For any comic book nerds, Kieran Gillen wrote Wicked at the Divine. He's one of like the really big, amazing comic kids, but he wrote a script for us for Gods. And it's about two tech bros who have decided to disrupt the oldest industry, religion. And as a result of disrupting it, they're kind of reinventing religion. And it's hilarious. And I just like, it's in my inbox and I want to read the pitch so desperately. So the moment I get done with work, I know it's technically more work, but I'm going to make myself a big cup of tea. I'm going to crawl into the bathtub and I'm going to just laugh.
Nice. So can you point to somebody who's been a role model for you in the work that you're doing?
Oh, God, that's such a great question. This is a hilariously cliche answer, but I am so incredibly just awed by Margaret Atwood. Like, she wrote the kind of books that helped me kind of challenge what it was like to be a woman in a male-dominated world,
right?
Kind of stand up and be stubborn. And as the company has grown, she's become a really big ally to Brink. So every time I get to sit down with lunch with her and talk about everything from politics to education to the power of storytelling, it's incredible. But what I really, really admire about her is she's got more stubbornness than sense. Like everyone has told her, particularly coming up as a woman doing like really big political, socioeconomic genre literature, when that's not what a woman did. And she just said no. Like she had such a defined version of the story she told about herself that society's stories just kind of fell off of her. And I so respect that. And she just gets better with age. Like, she's smart and funny and sharp and calls me out on my nonsense. And I don't think I will grow up to be Margaret Atwood, because who can? But if we can make some of that impact and we can create a world of more tiny little Margaret Atwoods, I'm going to feel great about it.
I love it. Well, the flip side of that one is, there an organization out there besides Brink that you really admire the work they're doing?
Oh, God, there's so many really great organizations out there. I'm going to terribly just actually list our partners, because if I meet someone that I think is utterly amazing, I'm just obsessed with them. We have a mental health partner called Black Men Heal that work particularly to help give mental health services for Black men, which is hugely stigmatized.
Right.
Those ladies are so stubborn and so smart and so cool, and they found such an important niche. And I think they're doing such powerful work, and they're incredible partners. There's an organization here in Colorado called H&C, And it is a nonprofit that helps other nonprofits thrive. I was lucky enough to be in their boot camp, and nothing has taught me more about being a leader than going through that. I mean, Nathan, who runs it, was the man that was like, Dani, you are a 17-year-old organization, go raise money. And I was like, no, I just want to make money. And he was like, think of all the students you are not reaching because you are being dumb and stubborn. And he was right. And he has an incredible eye, particularly for diverse leaders who are really doing ground up work. I couldn't say better things about them. And man, God, there are so many, Jay. I'm just going to end up listing everyone in Colorado. But Colorado also has incredible foundations. Like for having nearly 2 decades of stigma against foundations, I think about Caring for Denver or Colorado Health, who came in to fund a storytelling nonprofit that believed that comics would help with mental health. And they're innovative, and they come in and they meet my students and they ask the right questions. And it gives me so much faith that we can pivot to unconventional solutions, because often unconventional solutions are the only ones that work.
No doubt. Lastly, maybe most importantly, if somebody wants to learn more about Brink and support what you're doing, volunteer, whatever you may need, what's the best way to find you?
Oh, that's great. So yeah, if you want to support or volunteer, you are a lovely human being, and I would give you podcast remote hugs. You can go to brinklit.com and you can learn about what we do. You can donate, you can volunteer. If you just want to engage in really great storytelling, our latest issue of Friction is out. It's called Unseen, and it has that incredible formerly incarcerated student comic in it. And I think it's so powerful. So if you wanted to just, at the very least, pop on, read a free comic, feel your hearts and mind being changed. There's like a wee 3-question survey at the end of it about how you felt about it. And that data helps us grow so much. So if all you have is 10 minutes and no money, please read a comic and tell us what you thought of it, because honestly, that has a huge impact on our work. And you can do that at frictionlit.org.
Frictionlit.org and brinklit.org.
Yes, did I say .com? I definitely meant
I don't remember,
.org.
but we will definitely put all that in the show notes. Dani, thanks so much. As a girl dad, and elevating strong female leaders is one of my favorite things, and I'm so happy that I've learned more about what you're doing, and applaud everything that you guys have got going, and hope you continue it into the future.
Oh, thanks so much, Jay.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Dani for her amazing work with the Brink Literacy Project. This podcast has been brought to you by JC Charity Services. Being a leader is hard, and I'd love to help you thrive and bolster your efforts to bring more joy to your work. You can find me at makingourworldbetter.com. To learn more about the Brink Literacy Project and support their efforts, visit brinklit.org and follow them on social media. Check the show notes for links, and if you enjoyed this podcast, we'd be grateful if you'd share it with a friend. Until next time, I hope you're inspired to find a way to make our world better.